Annie Hall begins with a man standing in front of us, trying to explain why a relationship failed even though he still cannot stop thinking about it. That man is Alvy Singer, a comedian from New York who has spent so much of his life analyzing love, fear, memory, and disappointment that even his heartbreak arrives covered in commentary. He tells the story of Annie not like someone giving a clean summary of the past, but like someone digging through pieces of himself, trying to understand how something so alive could end and why he still misses it anyway. Alvy does not begin with Annie herself. He begins with the way his mind works. He remembers childhood in Brooklyn under the shadow of a roller coaster, growing up anxious, suspicious, and obsessed with the fact that life ends. Even as a boy, he is not built for simple happiness. He worries too much, thinks too much, and sees doom where other people see ordinary life. Those qualities grow up with him. As an adult, he becomes successful and funny, but beneath the wit there is always restlessness and dread. By the time we meet him, Alvy has already had marriages, breakups, and enough therapy to turn self-examination into a full-time habit. He is intelligent, difficult, charming when he wants to be, and exhausting in ways he only partly understands. The whole movie moves through his point of view, which means even the memories are filtered through his insecurities and his need to explain things. Then Annie Hall enters the story. Alvy meets Annie after a tennis game. She is awkward, bright, uncertain, and completely unlike the polished people who usually move through his world. Annie does not arrive as some glamorous ideal. She arrives as herself, talking fast, joking badly, nervous, curious, and strangely open. Alvy is drawn to her almost immediately because she feels unperformed. She is not pretending to have life figured out, and her uncertainty looks alive next to his practiced cynicism. Their first real conversations have the feeling of two people circling each other from different emotional climates. Alvy is older, more experienced, more controlled. Annie is still becoming herself. She wants connection, but she is also scared of looking foolish. Alvy wants intimacy, but only if he can keep understanding it while it happens. That difference matters from the start. The film moves through their relationship in a scattered memory-like way rather than clean chronology. It jumps backward and forward through time, childhood, previous relationships, and little emotional details that matter more than strict sequence. That structure fits Alvy perfectly. He is not telling the story the way events happened. He is telling it the way regret remembers. At first, the romance is warm and exciting. Annie comes into Alvy's apartment and into his life with an energy that unsettles him in a good way. He helps her explore books, music, films, and the more intellectual side of New York life. In some ways, he expands her world, but from the very beginning there is also an imbalance. He often treats her growth like something he is guiding rather than something she owns. He loves Annie, but he also wants to interpret her. Their connection is strongest in the quiet, funny moments. They cook lobster badly together. They stumble through early intimacy. They talk in ways that reveal how much people say and how much they hide. One of the smartest things the film does is show the difference between dialogue and thought at the same time. On the surface, they flirt. Underneath, both of them are worrying about being judged, rejected, or misunderstood. That split creates the tension of the whole relationship. They want closeness, but both carry private fear into every conversation. Annie begins the story less confident than Alvy, and that is part of what draws him in. He likes feeling needed. He likes being the sharper, more experienced person in the room, but love changes as soon as the other person starts standing on equal ground, and the movie understands this very well. As Annie becomes more comfortable in New York and in herself, she starts taking singing more seriously, starts building her own friendships, and starts developing a life that is not simply an extension of Alvy's taste. That should be a good thing. In many ways it is, but it also unsettles him. Alvy wants a partner, but he is more comfortable when he feels slightly ahead and slightly in control. The movie also spends time on their differences through family life. Alvy comes from a loud, urban Jewish background full of argument, intellect, and worry. Annie comes from a Midwestern family who feel more restrained, polite, and emotionally indirect. When the film contrasts these families, it does so with a lot of humor, but the humor exposes real cultural distance too. Alvy finds Annie's world bland and emotionally hidden. Annie can find Alvy's world intense, critical, and overwhelming. They are not just different people, they come from different emotional languages. At first, those differences are funny and attractive, later, they become pressure points. Another major part of the relationship is sex, or more accurately, how both of them think and worry around it. Alvy is obsessive, analytical, and quick to turn emotional problems into physical ones. Annie is less experienced, more hesitant, and often not fully in step with what he wants. They talk about sex, therapy, and love constantly, but all that talking does not always bring them closer. Sometimes it only shows how differently they experience the same relationship. The more Annie grows, the more she begins to resist being managed. She takes classes, she meets new people, she starts questioning whether New York and Alvy are the center of what she wants. Alvy responds by getting more anxious, more controlling, and more critical. He can sense her drifting, and instead of making space for her, he keeps trying to pull her back through interpretation, argument, and analysis. This is where the film becomes sadder than many romances. Nobody turns into a villain. Annie does not betray him in some dramatic way, and Alvy does not stop loving her. What happens is quieter and more recognizable. They begin failing to meet each other where they actually are. Annie has a growing need for possibility, independence, and movement. Alvy has a growing need for reassurance, familiarity, and emotional certainty. The more she opens, the tighter he becomes. The tighter he becomes, the more she feels crowded. Their problems sharpen further when success begins changing Annie's life. She gains confidence and starts singing publicly. Other people notice her. Opportunities appear around her that have nothing to do with Alvy. Instead of celebrating this fully, he becomes suspicious and defensive. He tells himself he's being honest or perceptive, but often he is simply afraid that if Annie becomes too strong on her own, she will see less need for him. And he is right to fear change, just not in the way he thinks. The relationship starts eroding through repeated disappointments, arguments, and the feeling that they are no longer traveling in the same direction. Alvy keeps trying to fix things with analysis, but love is not a puzzle that yields just because someone explains it well enough. Annie keeps trying to breathe inside the relationship, but breathing starts to feel like distance. They still care deeply, yet caring is no longer enough to make them good for each other. At one point, they go to Lowe's Angels, and the contrast becomes even sharper. Alvy hates the place immediately. To him, it feels shallow, artificial, and spiritually empty. Annie, however, does not recoil in the same way. She is curious. She feels possibility there. The trip becomes symbolic of everything separating them. Alvy clings to the identity he already knows. Annie is more willing to imagine becoming someone new. Eventually, the relationship breaks. Even after the breakup, Alvy cannot stop revisiting it in his mind. That is really what the movie is. It is the autopsy of a love affair performed by a man who still feels attached to the body. He remembers the joy, the awkwardness, the mistakes, the little scenes that only matter because they once mattered to two people who thought they might last. He also revisits his own earlier relationships, especially his marriages, and realizes how often the same patterns repeat. He wants depth but fears simplicity. He wants freedom but becomes threatened by it in others. He wants love but keeps turning it into something to diagnose. Annie is not the first relationship to fail, but she is the one that seems to teach him the most because she was the one most fully alive in his memory. After they separate, Annie moves forward in ways that make clear she is not just a supporting character in Alvy's emotional education. She keeps building her own life. She moves toward the future while Alvy stays partly trapped in reflection. He dates again, tries to recreate closeness, even imagines rewriting reality itself. In one of the film's most telling gestures, he writes a play based on their relationship, but changes the ending so the couple stays together. That is both funny and revealing. Art lets him control what life refused to preserve. Eventually, Alvy sees Annie again. There is still tenderness between them, and that tenderness is what gives the ending its emotional weight. They are not strangers. They are two people who once mattered profoundly to each other and still carry the shape of that meaning. But seeing each other again does not magically repair what broke. Time has moved. They have moved. The ache remains, but so does the truth that some relationships are not meant to be saved by sheer feeling. What the film understands so beautifully is that lost love does not become worthless just because it ends. Alvy keeps looking back not only because he is grieving Annie, but because being with her gave him experiences that remain real even now that the relationship is gone. The laughter was real. The intimacy was real. The confusion was real. The ending does not erase any of that. Annie Hall is full of jokes, inventions, memory tricks, and little surreal digressions, but all of them keep returning to the same idea. People enter each other's lives for reasons that are not always rational, and even when those relationships fail, they still matter. Alvy spends the whole movie trying to understand why love hurts so much, why people keep seeking it even when it disappoints them, and why certain connections stay alive in memory long after they stop working in life. In the end, he lands on something simple and sad and true. Human relationships are messy, irrational, fragile, and often doomed to fail under the weight of who people really are. But people keep reaching for them anyway because the alternative is emptier. That does not sound like a romantic answer in the usual sense, yet it is strangely tender. Alvy may not get Annie back, but he does reach a clearer understanding of what she meant. That is why the film ends with memory instead of triumph. Annie is not restored to him as a fantasy reward. She remains what she was, a person he loved, lost, and still carries with him. The point is not that they should have stayed together forever. The point is that what they had was worth having, even though it ended. So Annie Hall becomes more than a breakup story. It is a portrait of the way love changes us even when it does not last, and of the strange human habit of returning to old pain because there was joy there too. Alvy Singer tries to explain Annie Hall, and by the end what he really explains is why people keep choosing love despite everything. It is complicated, temporary, often painful, and still somehow necessary.